Nirvana was a band that originated in Aberdeen, Washington in the United States. They were a grunge band. They did alternative rock and they also did punk rock. They were active from 1987, at that point in time, as I understand it, known as Skid Row, all the way up till 1994. At the time of the lead vocalist's death, of course, the lead vocalist and guitarist being Kurt Cobain, Chris Novoselic as bass, as well as occasional vocals and the accordion later on. And then we also had Dave Grohl as drums and backing vocals from 1990 to 1994, with other drummers filling in beforehand. The three albums that they released were Bleach in 1989, Nevermind in 1991, and In Utero, which was in 1993. They were with Sub Pop and DGC in terms of record labels, major labels as I understand it, and then they sold a total of 75 million records. At least they have done, as far as I'm aware, at this point in time. Now, the question that I have, and that this video is going to try and answer, is Nirvana. Why were they successful? Why was Nirvana successful? And to do that, I think what we need to do is listen through their music to try and understand what they did well, what they did right, why it appeals to people. For me personally, I didn't really grow up with Nirvana. I was into like Linkin Park and stuff like that up until my teens. Then I started finding out about Smells Like Teen Spirit and stuff like that, and I started getting into that. A lot of the experience I've had with Nirvana has been sort of passive. Like, I know people who are really heavily into Nirvana and everything like that, and I can understand it because a lot of the music, like Smells Like Teen Spirit, Come As You Are, Heart-Shaped Box, and everything like that, they're great songs. There are some songs in this top 10 list which we're going to review today that I don't actually think I've listened to before, such as Dumb and Something in the Way, which I'm personally excited for. But I will note that I am not a hardcore Nirvana fan. I'm someone who is simply, as a music reviewer, going to be listening through each of these 10 tracks to sort of like get my thoughts on them. It should be worth noting that these will not be like my usual videos where I listen through the track and then get my thoughts. I'll be, just to avoid like copyright claims, there'll be a little bit at the start and then I'll get my thoughts. And I'll also have like text on the side so you can read through additional notes I make throughout the process of listening through them. But I'm hoping, again, through, listening through these 10 tracks today, that you and I watching this, that we can figure out why they were successful. I also want to sort of stress that just because this is Spotify's top 10, that may not mean it's your top 10 favorite tracks. For example, my favorite song from Nirvana, titled Breed, is not in the top 10, but I still respect the fact that the algorithm is king on Spotify. And yeah, we've got Smells Like Teen Spirit at the top with over 2 billion views. So if we switch over to here, we have everything on the screen with Kurt, Dave, and Chris here. I don't know what else to say at this point. This is the first time I've done a video like this. Please, again, if I misunderstand what a song is about, or if I don't get it right, feel free to let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think. But we're going to listen through each of these 10 tracks from start till finish, and we're going to hear what we think. So the 10th track on the list is All Apologies Off for the In Utero album, and after listening to this for the first time in quite a while, it's just a track that just goes by really quickly. There's absolutely no filler whatsoever. We have a situation where, like, legitimately the really pretty melodic line on the guitar is sort of juxtaposed by the fuzziness of the guitar in the choruses. You get a feeling that even though Kurt, or the singer, like that, they're trying to be nice, they are also just kind of done with being judged by that person. They're apologizing, but there's this line that I mentioned in the notes over there, all I know is I'll be gone, and you got to get the feeling that, well, whatever, I'm not going to be here in the end anyway, so what does it matter? It's a great song in the sense that there's a wonderful minimalism to the guitar work. Like, we don't try and overcomplicate the guitar riffs. It's a very raw performance. We're not trying to sort of make it crystal perfect, and I think that organic nature to the performance there with occasional, like, you can tell they recorded it in a studio live. Like, they're not, how do I describe it? It's almost like it's more endearing because it's like they're not trying to be sort of virtuoso guitarists about it. The drumming is tight, and the bass playing is wonderful, and there's a nice synergy between the way the drums and bass come together as well as the guitar melody. But there's also this looseness with, again, the vocal phrasing. Like Kurt, when he sings, is not trying to be super tuneful all the time either. There's a lot of attitude in it, but in a way that's not obnoxious or off-putting. I appreciate it. I think it's a really interesting track, and the way it was produced sounds really kind of gritty as well there. It's some of the most intriguing guitar distortion I've heard, and I think the fuzziness of it kind of is more atmospheric than anything else. Track number 9 is In Bloom from Nevermind, which I'm listening to the remastered version. Now, this track here is a special one for me. I've personally been in a covers band where I played this track live, and it's an incredible riff. It's just such a catchy riff on the guitar. The tightness of that with distorted guitars, with the bass and drums is wonderful. And it's just so, it's quite heavy. But the way that it goes out, and you just have Kurt just by themselves with the bass on top, with just that emptiness there with the story being told, is really phenomenal. It's such a dynamic contrast to it. I think for me personally, the flexibility of the drums working with some interesting triplet fills alongside just the sticksmanship with the various cymbal and tom patterns is great there. We're very comfortable going across the kit. And I think actually the way that we play the drums kind of ties the bass and the guitar together, if that makes sense, in a way where even if things, again, are a little bit loose, it still sounds cohesive. And I think that animalistic kind of tendency of it come through. Like, if you listen to the guitar solo in this, it's an incredibly intriguing solo here. It almost like, I mean, I mentioned this in notes over here, but it almost seems like the guitar is kind of stumbling over itself in that solo there. There's some chromaticism there. We're not trying to play nice with it. We're trying to be sort of super authentic, I think, in our phrasing there. And it becomes almost more sort of environmental than anything else. But at the same time, it's also weirdly melodic. I think the song is, from what I got from it, is that it's talking about people who maybe are acting like they know what's going on, but they really don't. And it's kind of the irony of that kind of false wisdom or something like that. I think that's kind of the way we're going with this, which makes sense with that solo about the person dancing and then falling over themselves. But you have some really cool efforts from Kurt with the vocal harmonies to kind of make it almost sort of catchy in that chorus section on top of everything going on with it. It's not like a rude, ruthless track in a sense. It's not that kind of heaviness or grittiness. And I think there was an attempt to sort of make it still sound great and accessible, but they've also added a sense of flair and attitude to it, which I also appreciate. It's a different sounding track to In Bloom, but I appreciate the fact that they're trying different things and they both seem to work. So track number 8 was The Man Who Sold the World, live. The live performance from the MTV Unplugged in New York, posthumous release there. I think it pays homage to the original quite well. It's a very gentle live performance. It's very different tonally and texturally to the other two tracks we've had, such as, In Bloom and All Apologies. I don't know what this track is about. I want to take it at face value. It talks about like a conversation that two people are having where they've been looking for something, and the other person maybe saw what they have or valued in order to get what they want, and in the end they lost it. I'm a bit vague on the details, and I'm trying to avoid looking through the lyrics in these just to kind of get it on like the first listen, etc. But I mean, either way, the way that Kurt sang was wonderful. It was very gentle, such as the guitar solo that we had alongside the strings in that latter half. I thought it was very well phrased there and very fragrant, and it was very pretty. There was like a great sort of thump and like presence to the bass line, the dom bom 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 bom, and the guitar was in time with that, and the drums were in time with that, and there was a great sense of unison. It was just a really tight live performance, and for me as a reviewer, what I appreciate about that is that they're just as good live as they are in the studio, and that is one of the perks of not trying to sort of like how do I say this, overcomplicate the studio recording process, or trying to sort of like do too many takes to kind of create sort of a different experience there. You want the listener to go to a concert and kind of even have like a better experience than they might have through the album, arguably. Compositionally, there were several different sections to this track that were distinct. They had different like intensities there. It was great to have the strings for legato feel there. I thought there was a great range with the drums there. The bass lines allowed for space for the guitar licks and stuff. The da 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 da. That they allowed for space for that. Kurt had plenty of space to tell their story that they were doing alongside the way. And yeah, it was wonderful. There was just a great sense of chemistry between the members involved there, and they sounded like they all wanted to be there. And I thought as well, just to comment on the production, because I haven't really spoken about that so far, the production has been incredibly tight. It hasn't sounded overproduced here. It sounded like they were in a room having an intimate acoustic performance, and I am incredibly jealous for the people that were able to partake in that. So track number 7 is titled Something in the Way off of the Nevermind album, and if I'm honest, this is probably one of the saddest songs I think I've heard in quite a while. I listened through the lyrics of this, and the song just starts with like quiet guitars and then Kurt. You get the strings come in that chorus section, you get the bass and drums, but it's very, very somber. It's very, very like low key. We are not like the lyrics that I got through talking about like living under a bridge and then like the ceiling having a leak and then living off of that. Like it just doesn't sound. There's several ways you could interpret that. For me, it just represents the struggle of feeling trapped and not being able to get away from that. I think that there is legitimately and definitively people who will probably be able to relate to that, just not being able to get out from underneath that ceiling. You know, I think that the way that the vocals are continued with a similar kind of sense of repetition, even with those harmonies that come in later on, as well as with the solo section from the strings in that later section there that kind of articulates the mid to high ranges, but never really resolves itself, kind of, again, as I mentioned in the notes over there, it kind of reflects the fact that things don't really get better, and you're left with this very different feeling to in Bloom. It's kind of visceral, and I kind of adore the fact that they've managed to do it like this, because for me, it just shows such range there. We've had 4 very distinctly different pieces of music there. And I think that the danger of saying, you know, Nirvana is like, for instance, Smells Like Teen Spirit, is that this is a very different song to that. I think Smells Like Teen Spirit is going to be the number 1 on this top 10 because it is tremendously popular. But it should be noted that I think in terms of actual songwriting, the performance, there can be so much power behind more of a minimalist performance like this, where it's more about the feeling, the vibe, rather than trying to have a lot of like technical diversity within the different parts there, you know, like having lots of different vocal ideas. I think this is one of those situations, just to close, where having less is more there. You just kind of, you can immediately empathize with their situation because of the fact that you just kind of sitting there in that mire with them. And so track number 6 is actually the 6th track off of the album titled In Utero. Now, this is a shorter song, and I kind of adore that. I think that you can get a lot of value out of making shorter pieces, because if you have a simpler story to tell, you get it out there, you put something, you're backing behind it, you create that sort of oral aesthetic that you want, and boom, you've smashed it. Now, there was compositional range within this track. We had several different sections there. We had the acoustic guitar and the strings almost immediately, you know, like we had Kurt there as well, sort of singing along, and we had the bass and drums come in later on. The bass was very active with the guitar. That's something I'll talk about in the overall conclusion, is how well the bass sort of segs into most of this. It's so active. I love it to pieces. But it's also the fact that the drums know how to pocket, and they take a step back and just allow things to just kind of like sit there and kind of, it's great. I appreciate it. With him talking about being dumb, I think I'm just happy. It kind of makes me wonder whether he's just looking at his life, the sort of reflections, what he's doing with it, and just kind of trying to be maybe a bit more gentle with himself. Maybe it's almost melancholic, I'm not quite sure. He talks about being hungover and stuff like that. Maybe it's about like just the daily sort of like the things that occurred in his life. Maybe it's about other people. Maybe he's making a comment to others. I'm not sure. I'd want to have another listen to this. And I think that I'm very cautious about trying to say I know what this track is about, primarily because I think with songs like this, you really need to sit there and kind of just sort of digest it. But in saying that, I think the parts I got through, just the way it was repeated for you to sort of pay attention to it. There was double tracking of the vocals as well on the sides there. You know, like there were parts where the vocals were on either side and they surrounded you, which was interesting from a stereo panning perspective there. It forced you to focus on it. I think that in addition to that, what's really sort of pleasant about this track is just how palatable the main theme was. There were some interesting major points here. I think that, especially in contrast to Something in the Way, we're trying to be a bit more peaceful with this one. And again, I think that if you listen to some of the main tracks, again, like Smells Like Teen Spirit and stuff like that, if you don't pay attention to go through the discography and try and take the albums in full, you might miss these things. In saying that, I'm glad that I listened to Dumb. And I think that it's just a well-written piece in short form that shows the instrumental prowess, the ability to tell a simple story, and I think it's really pleasant. I think that for people that maybe not so much of a fan of grunge, for example, they might find solace in stuff like this. So track number 5 is Lithium off of Nevermind. I'm listening to the remastered version. Now, this track is really intriguing. I've listened to this when I was a bit younger, and I never really paid much attention to the lyrics, but they're kind of wild. I get the inference there with the references to religion and stuff like that. They were discussing maybe the trials and tribulations we have with trying to sort of like be true to the expectations and sort of like the regimens that we had to follow in that regard. You have these kind of softer sections with the really kind of peppy, positive, kind of like chilled out guitar riff there with the rotary, with the rides, ding, 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 ding. You know, that things are kind of nice and peaceful and everything's okay and everything's all right. Maybe things they're trying to be sort of smoothed out. But then the chorus sections are just such a contrast to that. They're bombastic. They're ruthless with the distortion there. They're not vicious and they're not sort of horrific to listen to. But you can tell there was meant to be more of a vibe shift in those chorus sections, the way the instruments were played and how they sound there. Yeah, you got that, yeah, like that kind of stuff going on there from Kurtwood's. More like the passion is more simplistic, and you get the interlude section there with a wonderful, as I mentioned in the notes, a wonderful groove to the bass line. The drums were fantastic, and the variation to the guitar riffs were fantastic as well. But I love the bass grooves that they had in that interlude section there. I thought it was really funky. Bum, 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 kind of working with the pentatonic blues scale there. It was tremendous, alongside the lines of like, I'm gonna kill you, I'm not gonna crack, etc. The person trying to work through not giving into temptation, like how they're horny, but you know, that's okay, my will is good. It's a really fantastic track that I think, again, it warrants you actually sitting with it and absorbing it in its whole. I think the production on Nevermind so far, out of the albums I've listened to, it's probably my favorite on Nevermind. Even though I appreciate the kind of, how I suppose, it sounds a bit fragmented in In Utero. There's a bit of kind of, it sounds a bit kind of grittier. This is more kind of, there's just a bit of kind of polish in this that I really appreciate. But I also, both is good, don't get me wrong. I'll talk about the production more at the end, but it's a well-written track, fills out its runtime really well. I've got no complaints. So track number 4 out of this top 10 is a Heart-Shaped Box, and if I'm honest, I have no idea what to make of this track. It's one of the most surreal experiences I've had throughout this time listening through Nirvana's music. I mean, like, if I understand correctly, the lyric, cut myself on angel's hair and baby's breath, umbilical noose so I can climb back, forever in debt to your priceless advice. Are we talking about like a parent? Like someone who we see as like a parental figure? Is that literally it? Is it related to that? I'm not sure. I don't know how else you'd approach it though. I'm not sure if this is Kurt commenting on his family or something else, but either way, it is a really fascinating track and I have a lot of love for it. I think that there's a lot of passion behind their vocal performance there. The guitar riff, as I mentioned in notes, is sort of melancholic sounding, but it also has this kind of massive kind of emphasis on those unison bends and the chorus section there, creating this huge sense of tension there. And the drums sort of thump along as well. And the bass line kind of goes wow, wow. You know, like there's a lot of fury there. It feels very intense. And it sort of climaxes in that solo section where you had that guitar solo only on like the left side of the headphones there with the distorted bass. It's a testament to the level of dynamic range within the actual post-production itself. They allowed for such headroom in the mix and master that it really does sound like you're listening to a live performance. It doesn't sound like they're trying to squash or kind of overcompensate here. They have not overthought the process. They're focused on doing what's best for the music. And I got to show some love for that. It's part of what I think makes this music special, is they're not trying to sanitize it. And I think that would have completely ruined it. I don't think that Nirvana would have found a success if people had sort of overthought it in that studio side. But I think that it was sung incredibly well. The vocal fry, as I mentioned, in the chorus sections was really elegant. There were some interesting harmonies in the lower end during the verses as well. We're very comfortable with the vocal layers there. And I think just the way that we allowed for space with the drumming and bass as well for the guitar parts was I can understand why this is well received. I think the lyrics are maybe a little bit like, if you'd have to really think about the lyrics to understand them, and I would need more time and more listens to get that, but I think the track is well written enough to be able to sort of justify that extra time with it. And ultimately, it's just a really intriguing piece of work. It's a really great piece of art. So track number 3 off the top 10 is the third track off of Bleach, the first album from Nirvana, if I understand correctly. About a Girl sounds a lot more raw than the previous few. I've said raw a lot in this, but I mean it sounds a bit more lo-fi. Like, how do I describe it? It sounds like they recorded it in a studio where they were trying to go for, like, there's a bit of a kind of a high-end resonance there. It sounds like it's a bit more sort of roomy with the way that things have been captured there. It seems like they were trying to capture more the performance than, again, trying to sort of like overproduce and over-sterilize it. And I think that that's something that's really well appreciated. I think that the guitars and the bass did come through quite clearly, though. There was a charm to the way the guitars were strummed there. I think the bass line, what Chris was doing, it comes through in later albums as well. We're very, very comfortable with jamming along with a sense of pace to what's going on with the drum lines. I think honestly, the bass guitar is one of the things that makes Nirvana special, are the bass lines there, the activity and characterization of that. But you also have this lead solo that's very short-lived, but just as a nice alternative lead layer to what we have with the vocals going on, reiterating back into the main riff there. And the drums were quite tight as well. I'm not quite sure who was doing drums on this. I'll put a note in here so that I can sort of like verify that, because I want to give them credit too. But it's a situation where I think that the band sounded like they'd practiced together, they'd rehearsed, and they were very sort of like comfortable on their shoes. I know this is going off. I'm going to change the battery in a moment, but I just want to give like a shout out to everyone involved in this initial recording. I can understand why this is so popular, why people listen to it. The track itself, I think it is about a girl. Like, he talks about, I do think you fit the shoe and you hang me out to dry, and like seeing them every night. So I'm wondering if this is a person, maybe a one-sided relationship or something like that, but that's still really keen to sort of take part in, to be sort of like there for them, etc. You just get the feeling that like, because of the tone of it, it's not too heavy, not too intense, so they're just discussing their kind of difficulties there, but in a way that's less kind of like negative and kind of pithy. But yeah, ultimately it's a really charming track. A lot of the stuff has been a bit more sort of like I expected it to be a bit more angsty because of my lack of familiarity with stuff outside of the main Nirvana tracks. I'm glad I did this video, mostly because it's opened me up to the tonal, stylistic range there, the emotional kind of depth that we have there, the way we communicate different things effectively. And I still maintain that each of the 8 tracks we've listened to so far has their own personality in a way that makes them distinct and equally appreciable, but we've just got 2 more to go. So track number 2 of this top 10 is Come As You Are off of the Nevermind album. A few of these tracks have come off of that album. I have a feeling that Nevermind is understood to have been arguably their biggest one. This is the one, as I understand it, that really sort of launched them. Come As You Are is one of their biggest tracks. We even outside of the fact that on Spotify it has almost 1.3 billion plays. There are several reasons why I think it's successful, not just in the notes, but also in regards to what I want to sort of talk about really quickly here. I think first of all is just the fact that that guitar riff is so distinctive, and it's built in a way where it's kind of chromatic, goes down in semitones. It's just so it loops back into itself so succulently. It's such a satisfying melodic loop there. It rolls backwards and forwards. And I think that the reason that this is important is that we talk about, I think in the verse sections, we're talking about, it's like memories, right? Come as you are. I'm wondering if they're sort of inviting those thoughts that they used to have about someone. Maybe they're looking at someone as like a friend or as enemy or something like that. They're trying to sort of differentiate what's real and what's not. I get the impression the reason we're talking about I don't have a gun is maybe that we're sort of hallucinating that person is kind of like a danger to ourselves or something like that. But I also feel like maybe I'm either reading too much or too little into it. So I don't want to sort of talk about too much about what the lyrics are. It should be noted that I just think there's something extra going on there primarily because we spend half of the track iterating upon that memoria part as well as I don't have a gun part. But I think that the vocals are fantastic there. There's a great sort of vocal fry some of those parts there. It's very, I initially said charismatic, but I'm not really sure if that's the right way to describe the vocal style there. There's some interesting melodic phrasing with it. Da, 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 da. Like there's some fun sort of bluesy stuff going on there that harmonizes really neatly on top of the chord ideas, on top of the bass line there that sort of ruminates and sticks with the guitar line for a lot of it. The drums are so active in this, they're phenomenal. I think that there's a great sense of sort of like adherence to the sort of some ride grooves, but then we also have some really cool sort of snare stuff going on. Some interesting sort of 16th note slides there, and the transitions are seamless. There's also dynamic range to it. We're not playing the same loudness the whole entire time there. Not so much as in previous tracks there. There have been some really extreme sort of like differences with it, such as in Heart-Shaped Box between a solo and then coming down for that last sort of interlude bit. But with this, it seemed more sort of restrained dynamically, but at the same time, I think it still sort of nailed it in regards to composition. Structurally, the transitions between parts were seamless there. We had an unpredictable amount of iterations of that I don't have a gun part at the end there to kind of make the listener think, okay, how many times are we going to have this before it goes back to the do-do-do-dum? It plays with your expectations there. There's a sense of relative heaviness to the chorus section that kind of builds upon what's going on with the initial riff after the initial kind of distorted part, where it kind of has a great sense of almost like, it's like a standoffishness to it. Like we are kind of having a fight against the person we're trying to tell the story to. It loops back into itself within itself and then almost resolves to kind of that feedback loop of the main theme, which kind of, I think I'm going on a tangent, but effectively I just think that it's one of the most distinct, well-written riffs that Nirvana has made there. I thought the solo section on top later on was really dope as well. The rotary reverb and stuff like that, or the rotary tone on the guitars in that sort of late verse section as well is kind of slick as well. And, finally, I just think that it's a track where it leaves you more questions than answers. And I think that that's a track worth thinking about. Production solid. Everyone's playing well. Good stuff. So the big number one on this list, the top 10, is Smells Like Teen Spirit at 2 billion plays. It is a track which needs no introduction. You know, if you've heard Nirvana, you've probably heard Smells Like Teen Spirit. It's one of the key riffs that when I have a guitar student come through, they're like, I want to learn Smells Like Teen Spirit. There are many reasons why I think that as a track it is successful. I think it not only builds upon everything that Nirvana has previously instantiated in regards to their instrumental ability, the vocal stylings, the production, the songwriting, etc. All those key components are really on point for this. It's like the culmination of that without maybe some of the sort of like kind of Hato's got some of the dustier stylings of In Utero, but with Smells Like Teen Spirit, you have this polish here, the sheen to it that is really attractive. The song starts with just an intro riff there, the main sort of chorus riff there, and it's catchy enough on its own. There's an interesting rhythm to it. It's da 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 da. It's a really satisfying bass line as well. But then the drums, da 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 da, and then like the bass and the drums, and there's so much action there. And almost immediately as you start to get used to that, it pulls away, and then the vocals come in. And there's no Kurt for a while. Kurt comes in that verse section, but then there's like that build there, that crescendo, that increased intensity across the bridge there. And then the chorus comes in, you're reintroduced that initial riff, and you're just away. And then they add a little variation to the end of that chorus with the A and yay parts there with the unison bends on the guitars. I mean, the drum work in this is phenomenal. Dave absolutely slammed it. expressed as well. It's just really slick stuff for the bass lines as well there. It's very tight with the hi-hat and cymbal grooves there. The guitar, the minimalism with the guitars, the dun-dun and the verse parts there, allowing Kurt to have that presence in the mid to high range is just an absolute masterstroke. And to allow ourselves to have a solo section that iterates upon that vocal melody is kind of what I understand to be the antithesis of a lot of the music that came through the 80s. My understanding is a lot of bands had their careers messed with because of the complete shift in preference when the grunge movement came through. Like, there was a lot of really wild guitar playing and kind of wacky, kind of insane soloing going on through the 80s. And this was like the sucker punch to it. It was like the counterattack to it. And people liked going away from all that kind of fancy, ridiculous, crazy stuff and going back to what honestly is the roots of the rock and bluesy kind of stuff. Like, if you look at the blues groundings were soloing for like blues musicians back in the early 20th century, it was not particularly stupidly like crazy technical. It was more about the sort of feel of it. And I think in regards to the way we led ourselves in that lead section there, I think Kurt was basically trying to emphasize more of the way they wanted to sort of position themselves melodically through that. It made sense to iterate that in a way which you had a similar sort of like tone to the way we just sort of delivered things within, you know, the solo section for Come As You Are, or like that part there. And we were looping around the stereo field there, things were swimming, kind of like the baby in the water, you know, the baby in the water. Now, production-wise, it was tight, absolutely no complaints whatever about how things were produced, and this is incredible, like, it's industry-leading stuff. I would say, what do I think this track is about? Dude, this is a hard one. It's a hard one because I think I remember reading somewhere that some of the lyrics, like, you're talking about like albinos and like mulattoes and stuff like that. I'm hesitant to say I know what it's about. My best guess would be when we talk about entertainers and like stuff like I Forgot Why I Taste, I guess it makes me smile. I'm wondering if it's looking at who we are, why we do things, and the purpose of how we operate and what the point of it all is. It Smells Like Teen Spirit. Maybe it's looking at ourselves as adults and wondering what got us so passionate about it in the first place. Maybe it's us looking at where we are now, wondering, maybe that's it, but I'm hesitant. I don't know. There's mystery to this. Kurt was an exceptional lyricist there. I feel like I've kind of been stupefied by a lot of this, even though the language is very simple and accessible. You just get the feeling, the inherent implication that there is more than meets the air with this. I will say, though, that this has been an incredibly educational experience for me, listening through Nirvana's 10 tracks. So before we go into the conclusion, I just want to say, if you're still watching this, thank you for watching it, but also, hopefully, if you've been watching this, you'll maybe not have learned something because of me necessarily, but have learned something through actually listening through each of these. To be fair, I haven't been playing the tracks. I'd recommend you listen through these top 10 in your own time after this review if you want to really sort of experience them. Or even better, listen through these albums in their entirities. Just go into a room, in a dark room, and just sit there and absorb it. That's how people used to listen to CDs back in the 90s and even the 2000s and stuff like that. I know it's very different nowadays with streaming and stuff, but would recommend. But anyways, we are going to talk about each of these 10 tracks in the conclusion and give, I suppose, my overall personal thoughts and opinions on why I feel that Nirvana was successful. Because welcome to the conclusion of this video. We've listened through Nirvana's top 10 tracks on Spotify, and I have attempted to figure out, through listening to each of them, why they're successful. Just to reiterate the order, we had number 10, All Apologies, number 9, In Bloom, number 8, the cover of David Bowie's The Man Who Sold the World, the live performance, Something in the Way, track number 7, Dumb, number 6, 5, Lithium, 4, Heart-Shaped Box, 3, from their debut album, About a Girl, 2, Come As You Are, and then 1, Smells Like Teen Spirit. And I completely understand, to iterate, why they are successful. But it's for very different reasons that I would have provided, like, if I had not listened through each of these 10. If I'm honest about my understanding of why they were successful before doing this review, I would have gauged through listening to tracks such as like Come As You Are, Casually, Smells Like Teen Spirit, because I listen to it every week because the students, and then like songs like Breed. It's about the inherent passion and intensity of the music. But to be fair, I hadn't listened to tracks like Something in the Way before. what kind of startled me and stumbled me a little bit is just how much range there is. Lyrically, if I look through these tracks, all apologies. I'm not going to go through what I think these tracks are about, because honestly, I'd need to sort of double check my notes. But there's a lot. Each of these tracks has a different story. And I think personally that the way that they're written, Kurt is very, very clear when he wants you to understand it, and other times it's very, very evasive. Come As You Are is one explicitly, as well as Heart-Shaped Box. Those are two tracks that explicitly I feel kind of stupefied by, because I don't know how much to take literally, how much to take poetically. But I think that nonetheless, the way that the lyrics were told and written is incredibly coherent, and I appreciate the fact that they exist. I'm glad that Kurt tried to tell this, that they told their stories like this. I think that it's not just the lyrics though, it's the vocals from Kurt. And if I'd only heard Smells Like Teen Spirit, I almost would have sensed that Kurt was quite sort of apathetic and kind of angry in the choruses, right? But then you listen to tracks again, like The Man Who Sold the World, where the vocals are often quite gentle and stuff like that, and very approachable. Something in the Way, which is very low-key and very quiet. Dumb, where it's almost a bit more sort of like majorish and gentle and sort of chilled out. Heart-Shaped Box, where there's a sense of fury and kind of rage and frustration there. Come As You Are, About a Girl as well. Like, there are all these different moods, and Kurt is incredibly expressive as a vocalist and as a storyteller. We had solid vocal technique. We weren't always trying to have a perfect vocal sort of performance there. We were very, I think, true to ourselves, and we told the story we wanted to and expressed ourselves in a way where occasionally there was a bit of a vocal crack or whatever. We were very comfortable within our head and chest voice there. I think the reason why Nirvana was so unique is that it was just so unfiltered. It's almost like, that in some songs Kurt was trying to sort of shield themselves and keep you away from them, but at the same time, it's just, you could imagine that the performances would have been absolutely tremendous. Like when I listened through The Man Who Sold the World, and like the chivalry, the way that they communicated with each other on stage was absolutely sort of wonderful. It was very palatable. It was incredible. I think that the vocals were tight. There were lots of interesting melodies and catchy sort of like movements. Like, and Bloom for me was incredible. Just the catchiness, da 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 da. Like even though we were very attuned to what was required in regards to note choices with the vocals, and there were some interesting harmonies as well, and we made sure to sort of pay attention to what was going on with the guitar, bass, and drum parts, and we nailed it, smashed it. I've heard tracks where it's a bit more raw and there's a bit more kind of like fire and fury to it, along like tracks like Breed and everything like that. But I think that I can understand why people love these 10 tracks as well. And smashed it. I'm going to move on from the vocals though, because I feel like I'm repeating myself at this point. I don't want to sort of do that too much. It's sort of been quite a long video. I've been recording for an hour and a half at this point. It's nearly 1 o'clock at night. But I think that in regards to the structure of these tracks, they're typically between about 2.5 to 5 minutes, with Dumb being 2.5 and Smells Like Teen Spirit being 5. And even though there's a fair bit of repetition in a lot of these tracks, we're very comfortable with repeating hook lines or different notes, and like the looping is something that occurs quite a bit. It never becomes disinteresting. And I think part of that is we just have really great core ideas for our main themes and stuff, combined with instrumental performances that have just enough differentiation with some of the drum grooves or sort of cymbal patterns or fills. The bass line as well, there's some interesting sort of like movements in there where there's a bit of funkiness and stuff like that, which I appreciate there. We were very tight and percussive. With The Man Who Sold the World, especially the dom bom 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 bom, there's a lot of charisma to the bass playing that goes through from About a Girl all the way to in Utero. And it's just, it's awesome. So the drums and bass are tight, and it gave Kurt a license to do whatever they wanted to do harmonically with the guitars, with either their strum parts. We had verses and bridges and interludes and choruses, and we had some solo sections as well, which were kind of neat. There were some really interesting solo sections. Like if we talk about a few of the instruments that I appreciate here, Heart-Shaped Box, I liked the guitar solo in that, but it was kind of unexpected. Just, I've never really listened through headphones to it. It kind of peaks on the left side there. There were, the solos from like Bloom as well, which are kind of discordant, and again it sounded like a man sort of stumbling over themselves. Smells Like Teen Spirit, which is more sort of conservative, iterating upon the vocal melodies and stuff like that we have in the chorus sections. We are trying to sort of make our lead voices, our alternate ones, either appropriate for what we've already instantiated, so a little more sort of like palatable or expected, or we're trying to illustrate what we're trying to discuss in the lyrics a bit more vividly, potentially a bit more sort of literally. Either way, I think that there was some equal amounts melodic kind of inference there also an attention to kind of like, or an attempt to make it more sort of like noisy and I suppose a bit more sort of atmospheric. There were some recordings within this where we were very sort of comfortable having like feedback at the end of the track, or things kind of humming out, or like a bit of kind of rough edges to the edge where they were trimmed. There were some tracks where there was just dead noise or like blank space for like 5 seconds before the end of it. Again, we weren't trying to over polish it. It sounded like they recorded it, the take was done, they were good. This is a band that knew what they were doing there, but they were willing to let there be those kind of bits of feedback, or those kind of, like, with all apologies, like I remember the guitar performance there, it was like they could clearly play, but they weren't trying to sort of Yngwie Malmsteen it. There was some interesting, really kind of comfortable sort of picked parts and strum bits throughout this entire sort of pseudo discography here, with a focus on power chords, as well as the minimalism with some of the lead parts and everything like that, and a few really sort of sick unison bends. But I think with Kurt, just to finish with the guitar, it's more about the feel of it. It's more about creating a situation where you understand not just from the vocals what's going on, or maybe even more so from how the guitar sounds, focusing on the core, major, and minor triads, because there were very few extensions harmonically or anything like that. It was more about creating aesthetic as well as kind of making you feel a certain way. And I think that the dynamic range and performance of the guitars, as well as everything to do with the bass and drums, was sort of like is kind of inferred that as well. Because if I talk about the bass, honestly, like, Chris, I hope I'm right. It's is it Christ or Christ? I'm not sure. I'm hoping it's one of those two. Christ nailed the bass. Like, honestly, one of the best bass players I've heard in quite a long time, and I'm so glad I had the opportunity to listen through their work. The charisma to the performance there. They knew when to keep it more minimalist and only play certain notes, but they also, a lot of the time, they were keeping up with the guitar lines, and they would keep in time with the drums, and there was just so much space that was filled up by it, but in a way that kept a great sense of groove and pace to it. It was very complementary to the overall themes of the pieces, and we really sort of saw it, like, again, like Heart-Shaped Box and something like that, and The Man Who Sold the World and such like that, and Smells Like Teen Spirit, just the consistency of dum 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 dum. Come As You Are as well, boom 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 boom, like in that low end, iterating upon the guitar riff. There was such a great cohesion and sense of unity with those guitar and bass parts. They were very very tight. And it made it sound huge sounding because of that. When you have guitar and bass that are kind of separate, you have them, there'll be like a sense of maybe dissonance or like a separation that can be audible, but here they were it's very tight. It's just great to have more than just the root notes and just the drums adhered to by the bass, but the drums were phenomenal. Again, I'm not sure at this point who the drummer in About a Girl was for the Bleach album, but for Dave's work in Nevermind as well as in Utero was just absolutely stunning, tremendous. We were very comfortable with our cymbal and hi-hat grooves as well as the crashes and everything like that. We were very comfortable with our various sort of tom fills and everything like that. We were very sort of aware of when to keep things more sort of relaxed, again, keeping things nice and quiet, but we built it up with crashes and movements there, and we were not afraid to hit those drums nice and hard when required there. We had a similar sense of understanding, like, of the emotionality of pieces, I think, to Kurt. We knew how to build up and rise and then kind of fall down crescendo of that, and ultimately it was incredibly tight. Like, there were performances where you could tell they'd been playing together. They had great chemistry with each other. No, not a note out of place, honestly. Like, they accelerated. I think the drums, the bass, and the guitars were equally important within this band, and they were strong. And I understand why they succeeded the way they did. I should also mention the cello parts. I think I'll also try and mention that in the string parts in the initial part. I love them. I loved the sense of grace and body that they gave to some of those earlier pieces, like in The Man Who Sold the World, as in All Apologies and stuff like that. And I think in other pieces as well, there were string parts, and they just added the sense of romanticism to the piece. Like, it was, I mean, there was, like, I think that there was strings and something in the way as well in the end. It was like sadness, but it was like a beautiful kind kind of sad there. And it was like the missing ingredient, I think, because there's this kind of like coldness that can come from having those distorted fuzzy sounds there without that mid-range kind of extra little bit of affectation. I think that it's testament to the band and the way that they write, that they were able to sort of be aware of the fact that they needed that extra instrument in there. This is, again, another reason why I'm glad that I did this, because I was not aware that they had additional instrumentalists involved. I didn't know they had extra musicians who toured with them and stuff like that. I think it's great that we tried to get away from simply having the guitar, bass, and drums to adding more later on and experimenting and sort of fleshing out and evolving. Again, it is very sad that Kurt passed away in 1994, because it makes me wonder what other music they would have made. But then, to be fair, we might not have had the Foo Fighters, Dave Grohl's project as well, which, you know, the Foo Fighters are phenomenal. And it's just one of those things, you know. But I think the most important thing for us is to be grateful for the fact that the music exists in the first place, and that we had 3 wonderful albums. I will say before we hear that Nevermind is probably my favorite album, but I think part of that is because of the production value and stuff like that. There's just a little bit of a rough edge in Utero that I appreciate, but I like the polish of Nevermind a bit more. But moving on from that, I think the themes I discussed within the track, I don't really feel the need to sort of like go further onto the individual themes and the ideas. I think that if there was a lyric or a story that was being told, we chose appropriate chords, melodies, ways of playing the instruments to sort of emphasize that. I think one of the most vivid examples was Something in the Way, where you get the feeling of everything being quite low and Kurt being at the bottom underneath that ceiling there. That is incredibly vivid with that imagery there. That's enacted by that line there. And even when the bass and the drums come in, things don't lift up. There's that inherent heaviness there without the distorted guitars or anything like that. It's incredibly well done. You don't need to be too literal with the chord progressions and stuff like that to infer a sense of like personality for a track. It's just the way that you sort of stack things in the frequency spectrum and stuff like that can be more than enough there. It's the energy of the performance overall and stuff like that. And I think that what we have here is them making it an art form. But the studio recording, mixing, and mastering is my final take. I suppose if I was to compare the different albums here, because there are 4 different albums, you know, that we listened through. We listened to tracks from Bleach, Nevermind, and Utero, as well as MTV Unplugged in New York. To give like a summary of it, I think Bleach, their first album, was a little bit more sort of rough around the edges. There was a little bit more of a sort of a lo-fi aesthetic to it. Things were still mixed pretty well. The backing vocals, I think, in the track I heard About a Girl were like a little bit quiet, but that's okay. It's their first album, right? And it was 1989. The studio stuff we have nowadays is a bit more advanced than that, to a detriment or to a blessing, depending on your position on it. But I still think I appreciated the way they played there. Those raw, the kind of the grittiness of it made it seem a bit more authentic. And I appreciate not the harshness, but the kind of, it almost sounds kind of charming because of that. And you can hear Kurt alongside the guitar, bass, and drums. And the drums are like a little bit looser and stuff like that. But that's okay, though. It sounds like they're actually in a band playing music. And things are nice and wide in the stereo field. But not as much to an extent as previous tracks where they explore and sort of pan stuff for the solos and stuff. But still, very well done. I'd say the production in Nevermind is like a step up there. There's a bit more sort of, things are a bit more sort of like well leveled in that one there. The vocals, they've got a great sort of sheen and polish to them, despite not overproducing the vocals. The guitars are nice and wide in the stereo field, whether they're like the strummed or like the heavy distorted kind of parts there. But they also come down for songs like Something in the Way. They're aware that they still need their dynamic range there, which they don't sort of like kind of screw by trying to be sort of like pedantic about the leveling of stuff. They allow there to be that sense of humanity within that. The drums, the guitars and bass, they're nicely leveled in the frequency spectrum. And the solo sections, they even mess around with like the variation of like the positions of the solos if things are swirling around. Again, like the album art for it, you can see there with the baby swimming, and you kind of get the feeling like you're in the water with the band and stuff. So I think that's kind of dope there. I think the use of the rotary and stuff like that, and like some of the songs like Come As You Are and Smart 16 Spirit is also great. And I think the strings do come in this album with like Something in the Way as well. But I think in Utero, they were getting a bit more experimental with that one. I get the feeling they were kind of going back a step and trying to make it a bit more kind of like a little bit less produced, a little bit less polished. There was a bit Again, a bit of grayness, a bit of dustiness, some of the tones there. It kind of sounded like they were in more of a live setting. It sounded a little bit less sort of like commercialized. I could be making people angry here. It sounds a little bit less pretty, I suppose, than some parts of Nevermind. And I think that maybe that was more of a sort of a stylistic direction they were going in. I think that I appreciate what they were trying to do in regards to like the leveling of certain instruments on just one side. Like I think we had just the strings on the left side or the solo on the left side there. It was a bit more sounding like kind of edgy sounding. But I appreciate that because it makes it more interesting when things aren't totally level, right? And again, the vocals are still well handled. It's not like it was badly mixed or mastered. It's just, I don't know, like, it doesn't sound as clean sounding as Nevermind in a weird sense. I don't know how to describe it further. I'm being careful about my language here. But it was still, again, well mixed and mastered. Things were nicely leveled. There was a phenomenal dynamic range within tracks themselves to a point where it became artistic. And MTV Unplugged in New York was a live performance where you could hear the crowd, you could hear people talking and everything like that. And the instruments, it was just a clean live pace, you know. Things were, again, the mixing and mastering was commercial tier as well. They did a tremendous job of that, but you could tell that they were doing it with like a crowd and everything like that in the venue. And it had a sort of like a wholesomeness. And I think that was part of it was that they were doing the song, The Man Who Sold the World. But ultimately, with that in mind, and with me talking for like an hour and a half at this point, what I want to say is that the production value in general Nirvana, it allowed for both to sound commercial grade whilst also allowing for the inherent kind of, I suppose, it allowed for the inherent dirtiness of the genre to come through, like the grunge and alternate rock and stuff like that. It was like the golden period for it. It was recorded in a way which it literally sounded like a band went into the studio, they captured a phenomenal performance, and they left. And they weren't trying to necessarily make music that people would like. They were making music that sounded good to them. It was an outlet for Kurt as well as, I presume, for Kristen and Dave. And they smashed it. And I think that despite the tumultuous experience across their 7 years of existence, I can fully understand why they were successful. It's a band where they made phenomenal music. The songs, the lyrics were intriguing. The vocal performances are charismatic, but they were also appropriate to the stuff we were talking about. We came low when it was low, went up when it was up, and we expressed a wide variety of different emotions suitable for it, so that made sense. You could relate to it. And it showed, again, as I mentioned, it showed a singer, a front person who was cautious maybe of extending too far forward, but was also kind of letting you in a bit to understand him better. So it invokes a sense of kinsmanship, right? But it's also the fact that we had a wide variety of different guitar riffs, bass lines, with the bass pulling, like they were phenomenal. The bass lines were incredible alongside the guitar parts. I'm hoping that people show equal love to that. With solos that were trying to be sort of the antithesis of music that had come before it, and the drums were incredible. Like there was a lot of range and diversity to those in a way that was supportive and beneficial for the musical listening experience. Ultimately, you have solid sort of like commercial grade mixing and mastering production on top, and you have music where it makes perfect sense that they're successful. I think that they were pioneers of the grunge genre. I think that people they just made music that sounded cool. The image as well, I suppose, is another thing. The sort of no fucks given mentality there was wonderful. But then there were so many fucks given because Kurt tried to be like the stuff that Kurt spoke about. If you listen to it, it shows vulnerability. And I think that it's a double-edged sword, right? You've got to really take your time listening to music, but this music is good enough, it's phenomenal, it's great enough that you're more than happy to do it. So yeah, I think that's basically my thoughts on Nirvana as a band and why they're successful. I feel like I've had an out-of-body experience talking about them for this long, but hopefully there are some nuggets of wisdom for people to peruse. I would like to do more videos like this. I would like to listen to more musicians like this. I also am aware that listening to someone talk to about musicians for this long can be kind of dire, but we'll just see how we go. I would like to do videos on like Metallica and Taylor Swift and BTS and bands that I personally have an interest in, but I think I have more of an appreciation for Nirvana now after listening through the material, and I think that they just tick all the boxes. I still think that Breed is my favorite Metallica song. I like the cover that OTEP did of that track, but I think Nirvana's one is slick, and I think that the reason that their music is timeless is because, again, they are grunge. They are 90s alt rock. They are what changed a lot of music in rock and metal and stuff like that for a while to come, and they deserve all the love they get. And rest in peace, Kurt. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. This is my music review of their top 10 on Spotify, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show us some love on Spotify as well as our other digital streaming platforms, and stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as he help more than ever through the crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next big video about why I think a musician is successful. Spiderhands out.